We're going to jump right into it because we want to be mindful of people's time, and there's no reason to delay. So before, I didn't know if I introduced myself. I'm Christian Murphy, work here with the Sisters of St. Joseph as the Justice, Peace, and Integrity of Creation Director. And I'm joined here by Dr. Jason Jack. Welcome. How's that? Everyone can hear us good? Okay, wonderful. Thanks for being here. This is such a wonderful film. How many of you had seen this before? Who saw it for the first time tonight? Majority of us, right? Okay, wonderful. Yeah, it's a wonderful movie. It's really so well made and so exciting. Now, you wrote this wonderful book that is going to be. We're going to talk about that. But before we talk about that, what was it like to be invited to be part of this? Like, let's kind of go behind the scenes here on this process of getting that phone call to be in this.
Yeah, so it began with my relationship to Father Jim Martin. I first met him when he approached out at St. Paul's, the LGBTQ ministry that I'm a part of, with a proposal to come talk about the first edition of his book, Building a Bridge. And at the time, we were all very skeptical, right? We're New Yorkers. We're not very enthralled by star power. We thought, who is this guy popping onto the scene? We had our heroes already in the LGBTQ Catholic movement. We thought he was kind of an imposter. We were quite suspicious. And to be honest, his first presentation to us wasn't very impressive. You know, we were saying respect, compassion, sensitivity. So what? That's not very much, right? It's treating us like human beings. We need more. I remember one of my friends asked him, Father, do you think the church will ever approve same-sex marriage? And he looked at my friend and said, no. And he was heartbroken, right? But that first meeting was an opportunity for us to build a bridge with him. We ended up inviting him back to dinner, sharing our thoughts about the book. And as you saw from the production, it was a very honest time of dialogue. And he ended up amending his book, so the second edition changed. But through that process, we all became great friends with him. And when they were making the documentary, it was sort of natural for him to reach out to us. Being in New York City, our LGBTQ Catholic ministry at St. Paul's is really in the spotlight a lot. So when things like this are happening, when there are media requests, we often get them. So it wasn't a surprising thing, but it's still really exciting because it was a professional film crew. And, I was involved both as a gay Catholic, but also as a theologian offering my expertise. So it was a really exciting thing to be part of it. Yeah.
And how many, what year, if you can remember, was the first conversation you had with Father Jim?
So the first conversation was in summer of 2017.
17,
yeah.
Okay.
And then the second edition of the book came out about a year later. Mm-hmm. And they began filming, I think the summer before COVID.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think the movie came out in 21. And I'm selfishly really excited that we know each other before this, but then also that we have you here because I think your scene is the most important scene in the whole movie. And I'm not just saying that because you're here, but, many times in these kinds of movies, these things, the Father Jim of the movie wouldn't put that scene in because he doesn't look good. He's admitting that he made a mistake. He didn't do the first thing you're supposed to do, which is invite the people to the table. And it's kind of a scene where it shows how he tripped, but yet the building off of it. So I don't know about you all, but I think it's the most pivotal moment in the movie where it shows this is it. This is happening. You do not see that in other movies about somebody like that. Usually it's the opposite. Were you surprised when you saw the movie? I'm assuming you didn't get to see it early or anything like that. Were you surprised by how honest it was?
It's honest, but it's also hagiography of Father Jim. He's the central character. It does follow him and the growth of his ministry. I do appreciate that it shows his growth and his openness to us because those words that we said about appreciating his listening are true. I really, really admire him. I really respect him. At every point of the process, he has amplified our voices. I remember once he was asking for opinions. He's always asking for opinions. What do you think about this? What do you think about that? And he asked my opinion, so I wrote something down, a quick paragraph or two about what he was asking about. I emailed it to him. He gets something out. He said, I sent that to a couple cardinals. I said, oh my gosh. He makes it easier being a gay Catholic because I know that when I'm talking to him, I'm being heard and that he's amplifying my voice to the rest of the church.
Yeah. And you feel that too. In the discussions, you really do feel like this is somebody who's listening. and this to end the movie like they do. I'm sure it's tough too for him, and he says in the movie to kind of have to take all this on and become like this figure, like this pop, because that's not why he's doing it. He really does want to build up your voices like yourself. When's your meeting with the Pope? When's that happening? Right?
We'll see.
Yeah,
we'll see. I got to
right?
pull some more strings.
Yeah, one day. So then, to build a bridge, so to speak, to your work now, you have this book here, LGBT Catholic Ministry, Past and Present, which Jim writes the forward in. When were you working on this in relation to the movie?
So it actually happened shortly after the movie was being filmed, sort of at the height of the fervor around Jim Martin and his work with LGBTQ ministry. And I realized that so many people believe that LGBTQ ministry began with Jim, right? He was getting profiles in the New York Times and Mother Jones and news spots and here and there. And everybody was thinking that he was a revolutionary, right? Changing things in the church. And it was really important for me to think and to remember that actually he's not the first one doing this work. There have been people doing this ministry for 50 years, at least 50 years in the Catholic Church, openly doing gay and lesbian ministry, right? And that we have a lot to learn from that history for today so that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past, but also looking towards the future, right? There's a lot of experience there. There are a lot of stories that need to be told that will orient our church as we look forward to moving ahead in this regard. So I believe that the history really is so key, and this is really why I wrote the book, to remind people that yes, Father Jim is amazing and this work is so vital, but we have so many other leaders, so many other heroes, right, that we can learn from, that we can look up to. I'll say, as a gay man growing up in the church, I didn't have any people I could look up to. There were no examples. There were no models of faith. I didn't know any married men, right, gay men or lesbians for that matter. They were all outside the church. We looked down upon them. We condemned them, right? So when I became Catholic, when I came out as gay, I really had to sort of build that community for myself. And I hope that this book is a resource for young Catholics, young LGBTQ Catholics who are going through their own struggles or figuring out who they are, to know that they're not alone, right? There's this rich legacy of ministry, of advocacy, of activism coming up from the grassroots.
That's really beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And I think too, like you said, Father Jim's book, it is literally a bridge of a book. It's a soft book. Like, I don't mean that as any disrespect, but it's pretty simple. And yours is really dense. Really, like, there's a lot in here. How long was this been on your heart, do you think? Did you like, even in your studies of going to school, did you kind of know that this was in you?
It's interesting because I wrote my dissertation on the Mexican-American movement in the Catholic Church. So looking at the ways that Mexican-Americans challenge racism in the hierarchy. And I realized that I probably wasn't going to get a job as a Latino theologian because I'm not Latino. And this was as I was becoming more comfortable with my own sexuality and sort of growing into my leadership as an LGBTQ minister and advocate. And I made a pivot in my career, an intentional pivot, to reflecting on my own experience as a gay man, on the experiences of the LGBTQ community, just as this ministry is starting to take off in the church. It's really developing as a sub-discipline within pastoral ministry. The church is really on fire. People, especially at the grassroots, want to know more. They want to start ministries. And so it seemed like a really fruitful place for my own work and for my own reflection. And to be quite honest, much more authentic, right, coming from my own experience as a gay Catholic.
So how do you feel the work's going? How do you think? I mean, I see this line here. I underlined some pieces here where Martin says, a real sign for his pastoral care and concern for LGBT Catholics and LGBT people worldwide. How do you think this is going about 4 years later now?
So if you could see me under my mask, I'm smiling. I'm very, very hopeful, actually, with some nuance. I'm very hopeful because the grassroots is changing. Ordinary Catholics are far more affirming than the hierarchy is. In fact, if you look at surveys, about 70% of Catholics at the grassroots level support same-sex marriage, which is higher even than mainline Protestant denominations, right? So the grassroots Catholic communities are there, and parents and families are on board. They don't want to send their kids to non-affirming schools. They don't want to be attending non-affirming parishes, right? So I really believe there's an upswell in the church. That said, it's still a struggle in many places. I shared earlier tonight that I can be a gay Catholic. I can go to Mass with my husband, have a beautiful community because I live in New York City, which is a very privileged place, right? We have several LGBTQ ministries. I love my parish. My parish loves me. Our priest has openly blessed the same-sex couples in our parish, right? It's really a privileged location, but not everybody is there. I think of people in dioceses where the bishops are vocally anti-LGBTQ, and there's a lot of suffering. And in my experience, about 9 out of 10 LGBTQ people just leave the church without any second thought, right? They just don't see any way of reconciling those identities. So the work that is happening right now is needed. It's not coming a moment too late, but I am optimistic for the future.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of optimism in the film too. You do feel that there's this sense of hope, and it's funny. I actually really thought I liked the way that they showed the church militant gentleman in this movie, because I thought it actually painted a picture of a person that was deeper than just look at this guy. And they could have easily teed off on him. You know, they could have just been like, here we go. And he kind of teed off on himself a couple times, where you're like, oh boy, this guy. But there's a moment where he's talking to the group and he's saying, you know, this is why there's no one in the church anymore. And I'm like, really? That's what, like, these are the reasons why you're listening, right? I mean, it's kind of a paradox, really, when you see that. And it's heartbreaking. I mean, I'm sure it's heartbreaking even more so for you when you see this, because you care so much about both these communities. There's a great chapter here regarding skin in the game and kind of this idea of what does it mean to be an ally. So for us here, and then especially the Sisters of St. Joseph who really want to be allies in this, what does that mean? And tell us, what can we be doing more?
Sure. So I think, first of all, providing space for LGBTQ people is huge, right? So the fact that you have opened this auditorium tonight is half the battle for LGBTQ people who can't find spaces like this in a parish, right, or through a diocesan office. So space is number one. Number two, I'd encourage you to listen to the stories of LGBTQ people. Get to know us, get to know our families, get to know our relationships, our loves, and you'll see God at work there, right? And I believe that's where conversion is at. It's seeing God at work in LGBTQ lives. We're not intrinsically disordered as the Vatican has characterized us, right? We want to fall in love. We want to have families just like everybody else. That's number two. Number three, I'd encourage you to recognize the gifts and the charisms of LGBTQ people. They mentioned in the video, but invite LGBTQ people into leadership. We have a lot to contribute. The fact that some of us haven't left the church is a grace for the church, is a gift to the church. So I'd encourage you, really highlight the gifts of LGBTQ people. Put them in positions of public leadership, right? Lectors, Eucharistic ministers. I can't say how much representation matters, especially in parish or other ministry settings. So, yeah, and then when it comes down to it, LGBTQ people are just like anybody else, right? We're longing to be part of a community. We're longing to love and to be loved. And this is really what Christian discipleship is all about. This is what it means to be church. So you all have a beautiful, important legacy of being church to the marginalized, right? To those who are hurting, to those who are outsiders. And I'd encourage you, keep doing that, right? You have the skills, you have the gifts, you have the charisms. And the LGBTQ community is one more way that those skills can be put to use to build up the kingdom.
Yeah, wonderfully said. The final scene in the movie is so cool and so powerful, because you see all these people. It's like the mosaic comes together. You're seeing all these people, and I'm sure all of you kind of go, oh, hey, look at that. What was that day like? I'm just kind of curious, you know, where did you see the cameras and kind of go, wow, this is really wild, this is happening, this is interesting, or, you know, that looked like a beautiful celebration to be at.
Yeah, you know, it was at St. Francis of Assisi Church in Midtown Manhattan, which is a beautiful parish. They have an active LGBTQ ministry there. And to be honest, I was just showing up for the Pride Mass. I think Jim might have mentioned that they were going to be filming, but the film crew was sort of in the background, and I wasn't paying a lot of attention to it. It was a joyous day. I find that when you get a lot of LGBTQ Catholics together, there is a lot of joy there. There is a recognition that it's a gift, right, to be in faith, to be in community. So it was a momentous occasion. You could see there was great food, there was singing, there was celebration, there was dancing. It was an honor to be there.
It looked really beautiful, and the comments of the people afterwards that hadn't been to Mass in a while, I think, are very, very important. And I've been going to Mass my whole life and whatnot, and I've been to a lot of boring Masses, right? We're afraid to say that. I've been to a lot of Masses where you kind of go, whew, all right, it's like losing that game, and you're like, I gotta stretch the next day. That was a little rough. And so to have people see that it can be hopeful, it should be hopeful, it should be a celebration is really, really wonderful. I want to say too that the adoption part. I wasn't going to say this, but I'm just going to say it because I think it needs to be said. I'm adopted, and I'm very proud of that. And that scene where the gentleman talks about how he wouldn't have been adopted. I mean, that just wrecked me. Yeah. I mean, because that's where it starts to go. This touches all of us because we all statistically know someone or related to someone who is LGBT, right? The numbers are getting there. We're getting realistic. But then when it opens up like that, it just changed the conversation. Did you have any experience with any of the other people that were interviewed, like that gentleman beforehand?
I've met a couple of folks. So a few of the characters make appearances in my book. So Marianne is my closest friend from out at St. Paul's. She's a Catholic school teacher in Manhattan. Dear friend. We're constantly talking about church, and we are family to each other. And a few other folks I've interviewed for my book, and just sort of getting to know people in New York City. But yeah.
Now, Father Jim is at the Synod now. For many reasons, he does a lot of work with America and whatnot. It sounds really optimistic. The work that's being done there. There were already a couple of publishings about the potential for same-sex blessings and whatnot. So, do you think that coming out of the Synod, we are going to see? I don't want to say change. You think we're going to see something soon? Because I definitely feel like we're starting to see the water boil a little bit.
I hope so. I believe that the work that's been happening, again, at the grassroots level is starting to filter up. Unfortunately, here in the United States, we have many bishops who are quite recalcitrant. The USCCB is quite backward-looking, especially on LGBTQ issues. They do not model Pope Francis's pastoral heart. They have no interest in listening to LGBTQ people. So I think that will be a process of change, a process of time. I have a lot of fear that a lot more people are going to leave before it gets better. I have a great fear that many more LGBTQ children especially are going to suffer at the church's hand before it's all said and done. But I think as a whole, yes, the Synod is a moment, an opportunity for grace, right? I think it could have a huge effect on the church looking forward.
I appreciate your realism because I definitely think we have to be cautiously optimistic, and you have to in any ministry carefully step into it all, or else you just kind of get knocked around, right? And they're definitely. I mean, the stats are out there. The church is suffering. We're losing people. We're losing interest, and so I'm curious here. What would you say to all of us here who will possibly encounter a young person who isn't going to Mass anymore, who doesn't have interest? It may be because of LGBT rights. It may be because of just a lack of voice in general for young people. What do you find yourself saying to people to say, hey, give this a shot or have hope? What do you have for that?
First of all, I encourage people to get into a safe spiritual community, right? If you can't find a safe spiritual community in the Catholic Church, you should not be there, right? So first of all, it's sort of a matter of triage. Are you okay? Are you safe? If you're not in a safe parish, get out. Go find another community or take some time off. I really believe that God works outside of boxes. One of the beautiful things about Catholic theology is it recognizes that God's grace takes a lot of forms in a lot of different communities in a lot of different ways, oftentimes outside of the Catholic Church. So people need to find healing there. I encourage them to find healing there. But I also invite them to church. I find that a lot of LGBTQ people have a desire to connect to God, as all human beings do. They have a desire to be part of a loving, affirming community, and they don't know that those kind of communities exist. One of the greatest joys of being a gay Catholic is I see how incredible evangelists queer Catholics are. We are constantly inviting people to church. Every Sunday, I'm meeting 2 or 3 new people who are visiting our parish who've been invited by LGBTQ people or other allies within the congregation, right? We are a dynamic, lively community, and when we are loved and welcomed in the church, we love and contribute, we give back, right? And I wish everybody could see that everybody could know that, right? Just how dynamic of a presence we are. And man, if we could fully affirm and recognize LGBTQ people, the church would start moving in incredible directions.
I totally agree. And I think it's kind of amazing. It's kind of crazy, really, when you think about it, that the church as a whole has been working so hard, feverishly, to push out this population of people. And now the church is in a position where most likely this population of people is what's going to save the church.
Yeah.
The joy, you know? Yeah.
Yeah. And again, the church has a long way to go in learning and growing, but I'm hopeful, you know? I mean, this is what the kingdom is about. It's having faith in a reality in God's presence that's growing, that's going to be growing into the future, right? Jesus said, have the faith of a mustard seed and it'll sprout. And I think we're at that point, right? We see the mustard seed and we're waiting in joyful hope that it's going to explode.